Each rhetorical choice that you analyze in a rhetorical analysis should persuade through one of the three means of persuasion. It should either persuade through reason by making some argument, through character by helping create some persona, or through emotion by stirring an emotion in the audience. If you find a single technique in the text that seems to be persuading through more than one of these ways, through two or even all three, try breaking up that analysis and treating it as two separate rhetorical choices that just so happen to use the same technique. In order to analyze a rhetorical choice effectively, you need to think about which of the three means of persuasion the rhetorical technique you identify is relying on, whether it's through reason or character or emotion. And then you need to make sure that your explanation of the intended effects lines up with the same means of persuasion. You also need to make sure your obstacle also lines up with the same means of persuasion. So if you start off with a technique that relies on persuasion through the character of the writer, then your explanation of the intended effects on the audience must talk about how the technique is making the writer appear to the audience by using those specific adjectives defining the character they're trying to build. Your connection to the rhetorical obstacle must also be character-based, meaning that the audience must perceive the writer in some other way first, and the writer's trying to overcome that perception that they do not want. The same goes for techniques that persuade through reason or through emotion. If you identify a reason-based technique, you need to talk about reason-based effects and connect it to a reason-based obstacle. If you identify an emotion choice with an emotion technique, you need to talk about emotion-based effects and connect it to an emotion-based obstacle. When you mix these things up, your analysis doesn't make sense. For instance, if you identify a reasoning technique and then go on to explain the intended effects on the audience as character-based and then connect the obstacle to an emotion-based obstacle, logically that makes no sense because you can't give an audience reasoning for something and expect to change their emotions. You can't stir emotions in the audience and expect the audience to look at the writer in a different way. You can't talk about how the writer characterizes themselves in a certain way and expect the audience to realize some new idea. They don't fit together. They're not interchangeable like that. Let's take a look at an example of what I'm talking about here, about making techniques match the effects, match the constraints. So here's a technique that I identified from Florence Kelly's speech. Kelly begins her speech by opening her audience's eyes with overwhelming data on child labor in America. When I talk about the effects, I say by pointing out the sheer number of children already in the workforce and implying that they will take up a greater and greater percentage of the workforce in the future, Kelly is not only introducing her audience to the idea, but also attempting to shock them into realizing just how serious the issues are. Notice my wording there. I'm talking about helping them understand things, realize things. This is all pertaining to reason-based choices or logos choices. My obstacle as well connects a logos-based or reason-based obstacle. The activists in Kelly's audience are likely from middle and upper class households, as poor people cannot afford to travel and take time off from work to attend activist conferences. Her audience, therefore, are not the kinds of people directly affected by the issue of child labor. And while many may be abstractly aware that the practice exists, Kelly's initial strategy confronts them with facts. Okay, so again, I'm tying it back into logos or reason-based constraint there. Yeah, so once again, I've taken my reason-based technique, explained reason-based effects, and connected it to a reason-based obstacle. Let's take a look at another rhetorical choice here. Kelly attempts to open her audience's hearts to the plight of the children with appeals to pity and shame. So I've identified a pathos appeal here, an appeal to emotion, an emotion choice. The effects, the visual and auditory imagery that she uses is intended to stir pity for these children, while Kelly's reminders that they're working while the audience sleeps is designed to shame them. And so my effects are all focused on emotions. Finally, I connect it to an emotion-based obstacle. Kelly's appeal to pity here is designed to overcome her audience's lack of emotional attachment to the issue of child labor, as it is unlikely any of the women in the audience have had to experience the misery of sending a child into the workforce. Furthermore, as consumers, the audience are mostly oblivious to the harsh reality, so they don't feel that shame that she needs them to feel. So again, I've started with an emotion technique, I've explained emotion-based effects, and I've connected it to an emotion-based obstacle, which in this case is a lack of an emotion. Although sometimes, remember, the audience could be feeling some other emotion that the writer tries to twist or turn into a different emotion. Here, it's a lack of emotion that they're trying to overcome. On the next slide, I've got 3 documents that you can download that will help you better connect technique to effect to constraint, and they're divided up into logos-based, ethos-based, and pathos-based, or reason-based, character-based, emotion-based. Highly recommend that you download all 3 and use them anytime you do any kind of rhetorical analysis.